So, hello everyone. Strange feeling always saying hello to a blank screen. I'm sure you're saying hello back. Welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about a subject that I've been waiting a long time to reintroduce. And it's taken me quite a long time to get here. So the question is about how to integrate two different systems with different notions at their core, but rooted in the same code. Excuse me. And do they even need to be integrated? And integration is a powerful and a mysterious thing. So I'm going to explore whether and how they can be integrated. And you'll have to bear with me because I'd like to make this webinar as open as possible to anyone, to people who know human design but not the gene keys, to people who know the gene keys but not human design, and to people who know both. So a bit of a challenge, and this is the first time I have publicly spoken about human design in about 10 years, so it's a bit of a rabbit hole. So please forgive me if it takes a while, and this webinar is going to be structured a little differently from the usual ones, because we're not going to have a questions and answer session, and we're not going to have a self-illumination section. I'm going to finish with the quintessence. And the reason we're not having questions is because there's a lot to go through, and there will be a lot of questions, I'm sure, that come, and there is going to be a forum that you can send your questions into. It's going to be run by Werner Pitzel, who I'll also be introducing. And so there will be a place for the questions, but they won't get answered necessarily immediately. And I will finish with the quintessence, however. And if you can hang on until then, the quintessence is really the most important part of the call. So don't miss the quintessence. It's the simplest. And, you know, it's important to kind of just crystallize everything there. So coming on at the end of this of my transmission, we're going to have Werner Pitzel, who, while I've been working with the gene keys for the last decade or so, he has been integrating these two systems. So he is really the expert in this rather than I am. And he's going to talk to you a little bit about how you can get involved in this knowledge and the way in which these two fields interact, and give a place for your questions and, as I said, and your insights. So the first thing I want to say is that the thing about integration is that it works, to me anyway, it works in spite of our intellect. But it only really works when we open our hearts and our minds simultaneously. And many years ago, I coined a term for this. I called it syn thinking. Syn thinking, S-Y-N thinking. Syn thinking. Syn thinking is thinking with the heart, or radiating love through the mind. And it's, in a way, a higher form of perception at a higher frequency than the ordinary intellect. So integration is a living field. It's not a dry intellectual goal. You can't get there by thinking alone. It takes understanding, which is of the full being. So this is how I'd like to begin this journey into the matrix of human design and the gene keys. Because both these approaches have their traps, like anything else that's out there. Human design can trap you through its knowledge, through logic, through pattern, and through detail. And you can become obsessed with all those tools and numbers and things. And the gene keys, on the other hand, they can trap you maybe through the other side, through sentiment, in emotional yearning and fantasy, in the promise of the light rather than the self-discipline and the inner devotion that's actually needed to ignite the light. So both approaches have their pitfalls, but both also complement each other quite well. And the conundrum for me is about how best to present these two approaches in a way that the user is not overwhelmed or confused by the sheer weight of information. So that's why I'm talking to you now, to help hopefully bring some clarity to the issue, so that you can pick your way through the weave of this knowledge and be transformed rather than confused. So remember this, to arrive at an integrated view, you've got to transcend your intellect and your emotion. So you're going to have to learn this art of sin thinking. And sin thinking comes through contemplation. You see, all this knowledge that we're dealing with here, it all began a long, long time ago. We're looking at perennial wisdom. It's traveled for eons through humanity, through the initiates. And back in 1987, a new transmission, a new version of the perennial wisdom entered the world. And it's a living wisdom. And both human design and Gene Keys are a part of the same transmission that's continually growing and glowing and mutating, changing. But the key is how you approach it. You have to approach it with an open heart and with an open mind. This is not about becoming bogged down in opinions, facts, pseudoscience, sentiment, or fantasy. This is a living, breathing, transformational wisdom. It's a field. And to understand it, you've got to put yourself in resonance with that field. So what I want to do really is I'm going to tell you a bit of my story, the story of how I came to this wisdom, right back from the early days of human design and how that knowledge transformed my life and finally evolved to become the Gene Keys, because I've already done this journey of the first decade of the Gene Keys, but I want to go back further to give the real perspective of how this all fits together. So as I go into this story, I'll be using some of the language of human design. So if you aren't familiar with human design and some of those terms, then you needn't worry. It's not essential knowledge for everyone. And this webinar, it's really arisen out of the many questions and emails that I get on the subject, and that I hope it will answer most of the questions. At least that's my intention for doing it. So let's start with 1987. A portal or an event or a time that people have referred to as harmonic convergence. Back in 1987, our planet and indeed the whole solar system seemed to pass through this portal. And this portal opened us up to a new age, really, called the Age of Synthesis. It's connected, obviously, with the Age of Aquarius. And we call this harmonic convergence. And I wrote something on this, so I'm going to read what I wrote. Sorry. Much has been said of the harmonic convergence. It certainly represents a crossing over point in consciousness in which an unprecedented event occurred. Triggered by a supernova within the Orion system, 1987 bore witness to the beginning of the Age of Synthesis. What actually occurred was that a series of celestial alignments made possible a shift in the human brain chemistry, allowing us to finally perceive the same truth behind all the great teachings of the ages. It was also the year in which the third gospel, that's an interesting term, I know, was received by humanity. Although this great teaching was initially captured and transcribed by the mind of an initiate known as Ra Uru Hu, it was in fact seeded within the DNA of every human being alive at the time, and is thus readily accessible as a complete download to anyone operating at the right frequency. I wrote that a while ago. But I think it gives the feeling of something that happened that is still happening. That something was seeded at that time, and that we are riding this wave of the frequencies of this transmission, this living wisdom. And it first became human design, and it seems to have its own destiny. And the moment I first saw a human design body graph, a chart, I remember it very well, a light went off inside me instantly. And it was so powerful that I bought a ticket, a couple of days later, and I flew to the USA to meet the man who had brought this system forth. And in those early days, his name was, by the way, Ra Uru Hu, and Ra had this kind of mystique around him. He was surrounded by this very palpable aura of magic and mystery. It was fairly soon after his big experience with what he called the voice, where he received this knowledge. So he heard it as a voice. and it's important to say that it's still a transmission. In another person, it may have come as a vision. It's just that was how it was received by him. And you know, back then in Sedona, Arizona, and Taos in New Mexico, I just took the aura in. You know, I attended seminar after seminar. I had reading after reading with Ra, and each one cost like $300 or $400. I mean, I spent a fortune. I spent my inheritance studying this stuff and learning it. And, you know, I never took a single note. It was one of my things. I went to all those classes. I never took a single note. And I always kind of chuckled to myself when I saw people taking notes, not from a kind of condescending place at all, but that was never my way. I just sucked in the living transmission. I usually sat in the back and I imbibed it just deep into my cells. And somehow, mysteriously, it began to awaken something deep inside me. And then the next part of my story was when I returned to the UK after doing all that. And I was married to a beautiful Vietnamese woman. We had a whirlwind romance. I left my life in England and I went to the US, back from England to Hawaii, and that's how I came to human design. And the marriage that I'd had was a mismarriage, as it turned out. I had entered into it too quickly. I didn't know my human design information. I didn't know my strategy. I didn't know anything much. I was a hungry seeker. And as the transmission, though, began to work in me, my life gradually fell apart. Everything that was false about my life began to dissolve, and I tried to hang on to it, but there was nothing to do. You know, it was a disintegration. You know, before you have integration, you have to have disintegration. And that's what happened to me. So my marriage fell apart in just over a year. That's when I came back to the UK, kind of with my tail between my legs. I was around 28, 29 years old. Saturn return time, for those who know the astrology. I arrived in the UK with nothing. You know, I had no references, no plans, no idea who I was. I had this one thing. I had human design, and I'd imbibed it deeply. So I began my life again from the beginning, in a way, and I rented a small cottage in the English Oxfordshire countryside, and I waited. And in human design, if you learn nothing else, you will be lucky enough to learn this one thing: patience, because that's what it taught me. Patience. It teaches you how to wait. Whatever your type is, it teaches you how to wait. And I learned patience, and I'm a generator type in human design terms. And it was agony. You know, I waited, and nothing happened, and nothing continued happening. No flash of light, nothing. And the winter came, and the winter went. And there I was, tramping the soft English meadows, walking the hills at night, night after night after night, nothing happening. And then spring came, and a friend came to visit me, and in my little study up in the roof of this old house, I had my human design charts and all my profiles and notes and things, and I had them all stuck up on the wall. It was like a kind of NASA headquarters. And my friend said, you know, he was looking around and said, you need to get out more. You know, and he was right, you know, but I was waiting. And he said, you know, this stuff is interesting. I'm going to phone a friend of mine, and he's a journalist, and he works for the Evening Standard. It's a respected London newspaper. And I'm going to tell him about you. And so he did. And the journalist's interest was piqued, and surprisingly to me, and he called me, and he came down from London on the train to visit me. And I told him about human design, and I gave him a kind of human design reading. And as it happens, he was a reflector, which is a human design type. It's one of the rare types. And I remember we drank fine wine over lunch, which impressed him even more, because as a journalist, you know, and I was the son of a very well-known English reputed wine merchant, and he loved that. So he put that in his article as well, and it kind of got me a certain notoriety. You know, when the article came out, it was sort of about this wine connoisseur who'd gone rogue and discovered this amazing occult system, or something like that. And even though he was a skeptical man, he was very impressed by the effect that his reading had on him, and also the wine. And that basically triggered a whole raft of human design readings. And that turned into more interviews and more articles in national papers. And until a certain time, I was asked to do a double article in Kindred Spirit magazine, which is the UK's leading mind, body, spirit magazine. And that really sealed it, because after that point, the phone never stopped ringing. And suddenly my waiting had delivered something. And Ra, the founder of Human Design, he'd moved now to the Isle of Ibiza in the Mediterranean, and I went to see him, and he offered me the UK rights to teach Human Design and to set up an organization in the UK, which was very generous of him, because shortly after that he would sell them those rights for a considerable amount of money, and he gave me mine for free. And we got on pretty well, actually, Ra and I. So I went home and I set up a school, and I knew nothing about teaching, and I had to learn on the wing. But within 2 or 3 very busy years, I'd set up a successful human design school. It was the biggest one outside the US. And I trained several hundred students. I wrote manuals, books, articles. I trained teachers. I set up websites, all that kind of stuff. You know the story. But on the inside, I was now different, because I was freer. I was more myself, and I could feel it. And I met Marion, my wife, and I met her according to my human design strategy. And in human design, you see, I'm what's called a 4-6 profile. And a 4-6 profile demands that you wait to make friends before you commit to any relationships or you consummate them. And that's a very, very hard thing to do. But I did it, and we got married a few years later, and we're still together today, 14 years later. And in time, we also had 3 beautiful children. So when you come into your human design experiment, one of the things that you're told is that it's going to take 7 years to decondition your old patterns, they call them the not-self patterns, and then recondition your cells with your true patterns. And that was really interesting to me, and actually I thought 7 years is an awfully long time. I conceived a way of tracking that process using the patterns in the human design wheel, and I wrote a detailed synopsis of that whole journey. And you can read it, if you like, at the end of this webinar anytime. It makes really quite interesting reading. I read it for the first time recently in at least 7 to 10 years or something. It's about 40 pages long. But what you can do is you can see the process of how reconditioning or deconditioning works. And it had a really deep effect. And that writing, for me, is a real testament to the power of human design in my life. So on the inside, human design changed me, and it grounded me. It shaved off all my anxiety, or most of it. It allowed me to fully incarnate. And as I came into my power as a man, so my gifts started to emerge, and a huge creativity was unleashed in me. And something more, an urge to transcend. Because towards the end of my 7 years with human design knowledge, the knowledge itself began to feel increasingly tight around me. I felt hemmed in by the language, by the logic, and the very things that had brought me such grounding now became really quite stifling for me. So I began to change the language, and I opened it up, and I'm a natural writer. I have a master's in English literature. I specialized in poetry at university. So words are my field. And as I reshaped the human design language to allow more breath and more heart into it, something else began to occur. I began to, I guess I'd say, chafe against certain people in the human design community. And they didn't like my new approach. I was tinkering with the core transmission. That's how they saw it. And they were right. I never watered it down, though. In a way, I essentialized it. Is that a word? I essentialized it. I condensed it. I brought a femininity to the language. By the time I was done, it was no longer a world that I saw as a world of male logical order, and it had become poetic and feminine as well in a new way. And I'd conceived this spectrum of consciousness, a matrix of 3 words for each of the human design gates. They're called gates: a shadow, a gift, and a siddhi. So in a way, the gene keys were born through that system. But back then, I didn't call them the gene keys. And all of this came to me as I followed my human design strategy. And it was pretty bizarre, really. So soon my new approach was becoming a bit of a problem. Human design led by a man who was a self-proclaimed heretic. He didn't really want more than one heretic. And I found that deeply ironic. So it wasn't actually a problem with Ra in a way, but with some of those who were dug in around him and they saw themselves as the protectors of the knowledge, it was. And I had to respect that. So in a way, I felt squeezed out of that system and that community. And I had a very successful business built up over 5 years. What was I to do? I really wanted to honor Ra, so I decided to return the UK rights to him with a recommendation of whom to give them to. And so no money exchanged hands between us. It was kind of a pact of honor. He gave it to me for nothing. I gave it back to him for nothing. And we parted ways amicably, though it was clear he was not too impressed by my new direction either. So in a way, I think that brings up to date the story of the gene keys. That in a way, I've already done this webinar that picks up on the story from here onwards, and you can find that one on YouTube. I did it a couple of sessions ago, the first decade, and I tell how the gene keys developed out of my ongoing contemplations and from a big mystical experience that I had. And I'd like to get this absolutely clear, because rumor being what it is, things should be clear. And I don't really know what the human design world thinks of me. Recently, though, I heard the weirdest rumor that Ra was so poor that he'd pulled the gene keys out of the human design system and sold it to me. And I think he would turn in his grave if he heard that one. The gene keys revelation grew out of human design, yes. Human design provided the soil. So I'm eternally grateful to Ra and to human design. But it grew inside me. I provided the womb for that. And it's not such an unusual thing. When a new discovery or a new breakthrough or system comes into the world, it almost immediately begins to mutate as different people interact with it. If you think of Freud and Jung and Adler, each one standing on each other's shoulders and going further, these things should be celebrated, not resisted. Life moves on. So now you've kind of heard my story, I'd like to address some practicals in this webinar in the form of some essential questions. And then I'll go into a little bit of, give you some examples of human design, and I want to take it a little bit further into some of my insights I've had. Big question is, what is the difference between human design and gene keys? So I'm going to just read from the frequently asked questions on my website, because I think it's a very nice distillation of that. What is the difference between human design and gene keys? Even though both approaches are inspired by the same matrix of the 64, they're very different. The gene keys are a living transmission of wisdom that lie inside you. Unlike human design, they're not a profiling system. They have a profile, but they're not a profiling system with a fixed set of strategies for how to live your life. So human design is a logical, mental system that operates within a fixed set of parameters. The gene keys are a series of transformational experiential pathways that lead to higher states of consciousness. So instead of being based on certainty, like human design, the gene keys invite you to embrace the uncertainty of existence and that of your own boundless inner nature. So you see, they are fundamentally different approaches. So the only way to really find out how they're related is to enter into both of them. That's what you're going to have to do. Another question, I'm new to the gene keys. Do I also need to learn human design? Very important question. The answer is no. I could just stop there. A simple answer, and one that will save you a lot of confusion. if you're drawn to the gene keys, then you already have a big enough challenge in getting your head and your heart around the gene keys. And once you've gone deep into the gene keys, once you know what contemplation is, once you've seen the transmission at work in your relationships, once you've seen it at work in your finances, in your health, in your body, only then might be a good time to try another approach into the same transmission. And human design, by the way, is just one other approach. There will be others. There are others coming. So that's that one. Another question. I came to gene keys from human design. Is there a clear way of integrating the two approaches? That's obviously a big question. Yes, it's called integral human design. It was conceived by Werner Pitzel, as a very experienced psychotherapist from Austria. And he's going to come on at the end of this call and say hello. Working together, Werner and I, that was a while ago, we loaded all the gene keys language into the body graph, the human design body graph, to create an even wider way of mapping a human being. So in a way, we mapped 3 human beings. There was a shadow body graph, a gift body graph, and a siddhi, or an essence body graph. And we also created 3 levels of names for every channel and every circuit in human design. They're called circuits and channels. And I'll give you a few examples later on. And the result is extraordinary. And if you're well grounded in human design, you're going to love the playground that comes out of integral human design. And you can visit Werner's website to begin exploring it. And we'll give you the links at the end. It's integralhumandesign.net. So, yes, the answer is yes to that question. There is a way of integrating them. Another question that comes up a lot. When I look at my human design body graph, there are lots of gates activated, but in the golden path, only some of these gates or gene keys are used. Why is this? It's a common and a natural question to ask. In the golden path, we only use the positions of the Sun, the Earth, one from the Moon, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. But the other planets are not part of the golden path or its contemplation. And so the answer is that there are other sequences beyond the golden path, and they include the other planetary activations, but they haven't yet been revealed. And I have a sense of them, but we aren't ready for them yet. You know, can you ask yourself these questions? Are your relationships perfect? Are you prospering beautifully? The golden path really is the master sequence, and all the other sequences are engaged from inside that one. So they come naturally from within it, and they will. Also, too much information too soon is overwhelming. So the golden path lays all its focus on the primary pathways. So if you want to explore outside that, then you can explore integral human design, or you can wait for the other sequences to be revealed. They'll be along soon enough. It's not going to be long. So the bottom line is that you only ever really, what you ever really need to do is raise the frequency of a single gene key anyway. And then if you can do it with one, you're doing it with all of them. That's the teaching. Another question. This is a big one. Don't I need to know my strategy and authority from human design first to know what is and isn't right for me in life? That's the big question of human design. It opens up a whole web of other questions. So I'd like to follow where this leads, because it leads to some really interesting areas. And it's going to take us probably the rest of this webinar just to get through where this is going to lead us. Ra would always say that your type and strategy is the most essential knowledge for any human being to know. I'm not sure I agree with him. For those of you who aren't familiar with human design, its central essence revolves around a typology. And there are 4 types, or five types, some people say. And each type has a certain strategy for moving fluidly and correctly through life. They're called manifestors, generators, projectors, reflectors. Manifesting generators is the 5th one. And is that right? Yes. It's been such a long time. And in addition to this, human design gives you your unique authority. And your authority is how you are designed to make decisions in life. I'll say more about that later. But in human design, type and strategy is kind of like the Holy Grail. It's a bit tricky in a way because the claim of human design is that you can't awaken without this knowledge. It's a tricky one because I'm sure that human design people aren't really saying that unless you know your time of birth and you have access to a computer, you can't awaken. I'm sure no one is really saying that. So the question then is, there must also be other ways for you to live according to your type and strategy without actually knowing them intellectually and putting, there must be. So that's what I'd like to explore here. You see, I've discovered something through the Gene Keys, and I call it, my pet name for it is the automatic activation of type, AAT, if you like, abbreviations. And I hope you'll forgive me for reading a little bit from an article I wrote a while ago on this subject. I found it recently, and I introduce a broader way of thinking about human design, and it makes my point very clear, and I think it answers quite a lot of questions as well. We'll make sure the full article is available as well. I'm putting some things on the website about all this. And this also contains some human design language. Because people have awoken to the truth of their nature without the knowledge of their design, perhaps we should listen to them as to how it occurred for them. The most resounding message we receive from almost all the great teachers and enlightened beings is to purify our nature and open our hearts to the divine that lies inside us. And there are, of course, thousands of techniques to assist in this process. My own process of moving beyond human design has been to absorb its basic ingredients and allow them to find their way inside me. This is why I created a threefold language based on the spectrum of consciousness for each of the hexagrams and the gates of the body graph. And these are what I call the Gene Keys, because they represent codes of consciousness hidden inside our DNA. Furthermore, these codes can be unlocked by means of changing the frequency of electromagnetic energy passing through them. In other words, you can directly influence your DNA through your thoughts, your feelings, and your attitude. Most of you know this stuff already. But the new language, it allows your whole being, not just your mind, to contemplate these codes inside you. And by contemplation, I'm referring here to a deep process of meditative absorption and embodiment rather than a kind of considered thinking. In particular, the Gene Keys at the shadow frequency allows you to observe the specific shadow behavior patterns in your own body graph. And at the highest level, the same Gene Key allows you to contemplate your highest potential. So by continual contemplation of this highest potential, the Siddhi, I've found that the shadow pattern gradually dissolves all on its own. And this takes place because you're activating the higher frequency of that gate or that Gene Key. And if you do this as a sustained practice, it will change the entire frequency of your design as a whole, rapidly transforming your life. So used in this way, the human design body graph becomes a very exacting and potent meditation tool because you're contemplating and activating the exact codes of your own inner divinity. And this also brings human design beautifully in line with all the great spiritual teachings down the ages, allowing it to be truly integrative. So I want to give you a couple of examples of this. I've borrowed some slides from Werner and the integral human design approach. And I've taken a couple of examples of how these channels, these gates, and the Gene Keys all work together. Hopefully you can see these. Just make sure that's working. Yeah, I hope you can see them. So the first thing you see here is called the stream of love. In human design, there are these integral human design. There's these 7 streams of consciousness that make up. They're made up of all the channels and gates. Each channel has a gate at each end of it. That's how it's constructed, the body graph. And all the channels and the gates in this stream are really about the theme of love. So here you can see the channel 2838 is made up of those 2 Gene Keys. And at the shadow frequency, it's called the channel of strife. These are the names that Werner and I gave to the channels. And it's made up of the shadows of struggle and the shadow of purposelessness, long word, which when you put those 2 together, it equals strife. And I don't have time here to go into the 2 centers and their meaning in depth, but you can see that this one connects the spleen center, which at the shadow is about fear and alarm, and the root center, whose real shadow is stress. So quite a lot of pain in this one. And if you don't know how to transform it, you know how painful that really is. So how do you transform it? Well, look at the keynote. The purpose of that strife is to show you your purpose. That's purpose. To get you moving, to turn your life around. And you need perseverance and totality to do that, to find that inner purpose. So all struggle leads to purpose, to higher purpose. That's the secret of the Gene Keys, right? And there it is in this channel, in the body graph. And where is it going? To victory. So this is about creating something immortal. You know, immortality is one of those cities, something based on honor, something transcendent that goes beyond the small self. And you see that if you really give yourself to this transformation, you will one day achieve victory in the form of love. So remember, it's all about love. So that's an example of how you can look at these things, these channel gates, you know, using integral human design and the Gene Keys to breathe a whole new understanding into it. I'd like to take one more example, because it's kind of fun doing this. This one is from the stream of truth, or you could also say it's the shadow. It's the stream of dissatisfaction. And here we have the 17th Gene Key and the 62nd Gene Key. Two Gene Keys that are about dismemberment at the shadow frequency. So this is the power of opinion and intellect to set people apart from each other. You know, the truth stream, it's a collective stream. That is, it governs entire gene pools. So our dissatisfaction becomes our mental opinion. It becomes our dogma. It becomes our political view. This is all about politics at the shadow. This whole channel is political. And how do you transform that? How do you raise the frequency of that? Well, you open the heart a little bit to look beyond your fear-based view, and you serve the whole a little bit. And it becomes the gift of organization. The same energy put to creative work with far-sightedness and precision. That is successful governance. That is a prospering society. And at the highest level, it's holism, seeing the transcendent truth that everything is interconnected. That's called omniscience. And the embodiment of that as impeccability. That's living in alignment with truth. That's a far cry from the dissatisfied world we see around us today, but it is our potential, and it's the potential of anyone with that channel. Anyone with that channel has a part to play in making that story happen. So there's an example of how you can use the body graph as a frequency raising tool. And I'd like to come back now, though, to this question of type and strategy, because I wanted to show you how you use the body graph using the Gene Keys. But this question of type, my greatest revelation through a sustained practice of working with my human design body graph in this way. This was, you know, a while ago. I haven't used this knowledge for a long time, but it's what I call this automatic activation of type. So as you raise the frequency of your DNA beyond the shadow patterns, you bring yourself naturally into a higher harmony with all creation. And the higher your frequency rises in the spectrum, the more impeccably you move in coordination with cosmic geometries, like what we were just talking about. Therefore, without even knowing your type and strategy, it simply plays itself out in your life automatically of its own accord. I mean, that's the revelation. It's actually a byproduct of raising your frequency. So knowing this, I've come to realize the true value of human design as well as its limitations. So without acknowledging the higher reality beyond its own language, it only allows you to claim a certain level of harmony beyond which it can't go unless you use these higher terminology, the word, so that you can expand your consciousness within it. I'll give you an example from my own design. I have my personality sun, that's my life's work, in the Gene Key 64, line 4. And in the Gene Keys language, the 64 represents the shadow of confusion, the gift of imagination, and the siddhi, the divine attribute of illumination. So in following my type and its strategy for 7 years, I gradually witnessed the transcendence of my confusion about life. That was the thing, confusion. And even though my mind might become confused about something temporarily, my strategy would cut through that confusion. And the result was that my mind slowly stopped trying to resolve my own life and started manifesting its higher frequency. That's because I was waiting. The gift of imagination. And I used my imagination in the service of my strategy to teach, to write, to communicate truths about human design that were inspirational and captured the imagination of lots of people. Luckily for me, the fates stepped in and allowed me to experience this frequency at an even higher level. And that's when I directly experienced this siddhi of illumination for 3 whole days. That was back in 2004. And this was an experience beyond words, because I perceived the inner light behind imagination and behind all forms, and it streamed out of every atom of my being, and it allowed my mind to access a higher reality. In many ways, I'm still following the rays of that illumination. And I find that at certain times I can still access the beauty of that siddhi. And I know that it's a key aspect of my own mythology and my own DNA. So you see how this works? You know, the frequency bands, you know, they activate type and strategy naturally. And the other thing I wanted to discuss is about the heart and this question of authority, of making decisions. Thing is, I love simplicity, and I love the simplicity in human design of type and strategy. It's really simple, it's beautiful. And I love the idea that it's all about making correct decisions. Knowing your correct decision-making authority is the other great secret of human design. And I had another great revelation about this. When you learn human design as a beginner, you learn about the 9 centers and you learn about their roles in your body. And it comes in particular to this center called the G center, which is right in the middle of your chest. And you learn about something called a magnetic monopole. It's very central to the whole human design knowledge. And this is a kind of attractor field that draws you along the line of your destiny. And it connects you into the living geometry of all life. And it's here in the G center, in the second gate in the body graph, human design, the second gene key, that the magnetic monopole lives. And the frequency bands of the second gene key are the shadow of dislocation, the gift of orientation, and the siddhi of unity. So regardless of whether the center is defined or undefined in your human design body graph, here in this gate, in this center, is a potential universal authority for anyone to make clear and correct decisions in harmony with the whole cosmos. So once again, in my own experience, it's just my experience, it's all about frequency. If you're caught in the shadow frequency, then your decisions always dislocate you from the whole. And when you begin to open your heart up to life, which is the gift frequency, then you suddenly begin to orient yourself correctly through your decisions. And finally, in the siddhi, you experience direct unity and oneness with all creation as your total surrender to your own inner divinity engages that monopole sorry, to make all your decisions, functions, and even your bodily movements without any interference from your mind or your emotions. So you become an enlightened witness. And in other words, no matter what your design is, what your type authority is, all clear decisions ultimately originate from your monopole, from here. So whenever you raise your own frequency through opening up your heart to others and to life, you immediately engage with this place, this monopole deep inside you, which is why the greatest teachings about decisions down the ages have always been the simplest. Follow your heart. Not your mind, not your emotions, your heart. Here within your sternum, that's where your heart really is. So just because there are other ways to make clear and harmonious decisions outside human design, it doesn't make human design any less valuable. By acknowledging these timeless truths of existence and even verifying them, human design, once again, it can prove that it's truly an integral system. Right. So I told you it's going to be a lot of information to go through. I want to cover it all the big themes. There's one final big theme. You can probably guess what that is. The solar plexus center. Life beyond the solar plexus center. In human design, one of the greatest insights of human design after type and authority, it's the emotional system, the human emotional system. And it's simply not possible for you to follow your heart unless you can discriminate it from your emotions, because the emotions are so powerful. The mind is powerful, the emotions are powerful. So here in the solar plexus center, which is the rainbow colored one in the integral human design body graph, here is the greatest concentration of nervous ganglia in the body after the brain. So in the esoteric teachings of old, this center is also known as the hub of the astral body, the desire body. So when you view the solar plexus center through the Gene Keys teachings, you can see, and that's the human design one, you can see its many frequency bands and themes, because each of the 3 bands has 7 gates in this center in human design. And it describes the kind of realms of heaven and hell depicted in the ancient teachings. The shadows, for instance, are the 6th gene key, conflict, the 30th, desire, the 55th, victimization, the 49th, reaction, the 37th, weakness, the 22nd, dishonor, and the 36th, crisis. Those are the emotional shadows. Those are the core hell gates. At the other end of the spectrum, the 7 cities would be peace, that's the 6th, rapture, that's the 30th, freedom, that's the 55th, rebirth, that's the 49th, tenderness, that's the 37th, grace, that's the 22nd, and compassion, that's the 36th. So once you've raised your frequency beyond these shadow patterns, then and only then can you begin to hear this kind of still small voice of your heart inside your breast. And once again, it's only of secondary importance whether the center is defined or undefined in your design. I mean, that's interesting to know. But the definition, defined, is when it's colored in, because in some people it's not colored in. And there's if you don't know about human design, you can find out about that. It's everywhere. The definition simply describes the mechanics as it plays out in your life. However, if you're committed to raising your frequency, you don't even need to understand those mechanics, because they will be transcended all on their own in the simplest and the most beautiful way. So the other beautiful thing about the teaching is that when you raise the frequency, as I said earlier, of one gate in your body graph, you raise the frequency of all of them, because DNA operates in a holographic field within the body. So all these patterns and frequencies are intricately interwoven. So what I'm saying really is that the solar plexus center and its many waves represent an incredible opportunity opening up for humanity. I've talked about this a lot. It's in the 55th gene key especially. You no longer have to be a victim of the wave patterns of pleasure and pain. And as you raise the frequency of your DNA, your awareness rises up on these waves and it surfs on top of them rather than being plunged into them and caught into their shadow patterns. This is what happens at the gift frequency. You feel them flowing through you, either transmitted in a defined center or received in an undefined center, but your awareness is strong enough not to react to them. So at the city frequency, you even ditch the surfboard, and you take to the air beyond the emotional waves of humanity. It's here in the air that the higher currents of Shakti or divine essence begin to flood your body and your being, and you actually transcend your DNA and your design all together, and along with them your suffering. And such states have always been known in the world, and we now live in a very special time in which they are more available and easier to attain. So I hope this gives you an idea of how to integrate some of the spiritual teachings more seamlessly into human design using the gene keys, because when you bring these two things together, you get something really potent. One of the great statements made by, I don't know who it was, it might have been Ken Wilber or someone, about integration, and is transcend and include, you know. So all of that I just gave you, my introduction to my own vision for a new kind of human design, integral human design and beyond, is really only the tip of the iceberg of the potential I can see for human design as a tool for the awakening of humanity's higher evolution. But one of the great steps for anyone involved in any system of teaching is always to remain open to other systems. So knowing your type, your strategy, and your authority is extremely useful and very helpful, especially for providing emotional and mental stability in the beginning of your awakening process. Furthermore, when they are attached to the spiritual framework of the Gene Keys as well, they become the foundation for one of the most grounded approaches to self-realization that I've ever come across. So this great law of transcendence, this axiom, transcend and include, is really important. Transcendence never negates what has come before. It always finds a way to integrate its true value while at the same time adding new dimensions and insights to the original form. It also, by the way, deletes all the stuff that isn't necessary. And that's very much what happened to me as I moved past human design, and I took what was inside me and integrated it at a higher level. So to conclude this lengthy transmission, and thank you very much for staying with me, I want to make it clear that I am in no way setting Gene Keys above human design. You know, the Gene Keys grew out of human design. So if you are working with human design, then use the Gene Keys as well and integrate the two approaches. And many of you are already doing this, you've started doing this. And if you are new to the Gene Keys and human design, then I recommend you do not try and work with both approaches, at least not in the beginning. Just do one thing at a time. Doing the Golden Path program with the book is enough to keep you busy on its own for at least a year of your life, possibly more. And as I keep reminding you in these webinars, the beauty of the Golden Path is that it is all laid out in very simple steps. So you can take one step at a time in your own time, and one sequence at a time in your own time. That's what I recommend. You know, I work with the Gene Keys because they are a living transmission. They're a grand synthesis with multiple approaches, and human design is one of these approaches. And if you've done the Golden Path and you want to explore it further, the transmission, then begin with integral human design, if that's where you want to go, because then the two approaches will flow seamlessly one into another. And in integral human design, the work of synthesizing is already been done for you, because Werner's done it all. So you needn't reinvent the wheel. You know, Werner and I, some time ago, we did an introductory webinar to integral human design. That was a few years back, and we're just making that available to go after this webinar as a free introduction to anyone interested in this integral approach. And so you can get a taste of Werner's style and you know, his way of approaching it, and also Laura, who's behind him, you know, a wonderful woman. I thoroughly recommend integral human design it's a very rigorous and a hugely inclusive spiritual approach in its own right, and you'll find it very different from the standard version of human design. In fact, it's not in any way another version of human design. It's much bigger than that. It's emerged through a brilliant mind and a very open-hearted and grounded approach to life. I'm talking about Werner and his wife Laura, who are pioneering integral human design. So I'm always really fascinated to see the insights that come out of that approach from those two. So you can watch the free introduction and you can get a flavor of the new language and how we've integrated these two approaches. And if you want to go further into the depth and the detail of integral human design, then I think Werner also has some other webinars and contributions and things that he's going to talk about in a moment. So I'd like to invite Werner in. Hopefully he's here.
Hello.
Ah, there you are.
Hello, Richard.
Hi.
Thank you for this beautiful presentation and sharing your life's journey in that.
I hope I didn't put you to sleep.
No, not at all. It was fun and touching to listen to you.
Yeah, you remembered a lot of those things probably from
Oh
your
yes,
own.
we shared some of that.
Yeah. So I wondered if you could talk to people firstly about how they can get involved in integral human design.
You can get involved very easily. I think we have a slide even prepared. There is a link where you can sign up and get some free information, free stuff from us. It's basically our website. Here it is, integralhumandesign.net/discovery. You also get a free transcript of the Discovery series, video series that Richard just mentioned that you and I did some time ago. And that's like the first layer how to get involved. And when you signed up there, you will be informed about further offerings. The next thing that's going to come out is a video series, a course really that we call the Gene Keys in the Body Graph. And that's going to come out early next year, probably in January, maybe February, where we do two things. Basically, we show you this connection between the gene keys and the body graph, because the body graph is really a web of the gene keys. It makes it all interconnected and interwoven, just like life is. Life is a web. And we dive into an overview of both the 9 centers of the body graph through this lens of the gene keys and the 7 streams in the body graph through the lens of the gene keys. And also what's in this series then, the gene keys in the body graph, is this differentiation between the gene keys as the matrix of the 64, the body graph as the web generally, how it describes our design as human beings and our archetypes of consciousness on the one hand, and on the other hand, the personal set of gene keys. Yeah? How do we select our personal set of gene keys, and then how do we work with that? Because it's very different when you personalize these keys and go into the details of our numbers in the whole genetic profile and in the body graph evaluations. And then later on, we're going to release more in-depth courses of all the material that we have put together over the years, teaching integral human design here in Europe live to people. We have lots of slides, and we've collected lots of truths that we want to share with you in in-depth courses later on. And for this community, when you signed up at our website, we'll always send you a special offer, because the Gene Keys community is special to us.
And you yourself, Werner, you've gone through a lot of kind of quantum leaps, haven't you, in your understanding, integrating these approaches? Yeah. I mean, I think you've gone beyond where my mind is at. I need updating by you as well. Can you tell us something about some of your more recent sort of realizations?
Well, one thing when we talk about integral human design, you mentioned it, is always Laura and me, and that's one of the things. My wife Laura and I, we are in constant dialogue about these things, and that's one of the things that we really found out is crucial on these journeys of transformation. Some people can walk their path more by themselves, and some people need more dialogue and engaging with a guide. A guide is somebody who is able to show you things that otherwise you wouldn't see, and therefore integral human design is really two things. It's what you talked about. It's a big map. It's an open map where we integrated one other dimension really, in addition to what comes from human design, which is the types, the type of person, and what's so beautifully elaborated in the Gene Keys, which is the stages of awakening and stages of consciousness. And then there is also the personal development, yeah? The spiral of moving through stages of more and more transcending and including more and more, and maturing really as a person. And that's two different aspects of transformation. One is awakening, and one is really growing up, if you want, moving into more maturity, more embracing more of the complexity of the world. So that's the conceptual expansion that we have gone through in these last years. Integral Human Design is really an open map that gives you orientation, what's possible for you, yeah? to live the strengths of your type, to awaken through stages of development, or to find your enlightened essence in these states. That's one thing, and the other thing is Integral Human Design is this map of human design, the gene keys, and some other things. You find more on our website about that. And it has really grown from working with people. I mean, Laura and I work with people nearly more than 30 years now. So we have always taken these maps and corrected them, if you want, to match more the experience that we had in the process of accompanying people, yeah? Guiding people on their path. And we found that every path is really very individual. So we have the maps, and we have a consultation service, really, where we offer what we found so useful, which is a dialogue with somebody who can actually see the big picture of the map and of you, because the gene keys really are all about embodiment. And this embodiment for us human beings, it happens very much through a constant dialogue with other people, having some stuff mirrored back to you. Working with the shadows with another person is very different from working with it alone. We are hardwired for connection, so that's one thing that's in our bigger understanding of human design. Human design is much more than just what the human design system has described. It's how we are set up, what is our hardwiring as human beings. And when we see all that and put it together with this map, then in the consultation, really we can tailor people's life practice, your life practice, to the exact next step of your personal growth and development. And for some people, that's finding the inner ground in their self, and for some people it's deconditioning, and for some people it's the next level, which is something about self-authorship in your life, and for some people it's going beyond that and transcend the self and go into states and stages of awakening.
That's great. And do you do these practically via, if people are a long way away, they can dialogue with you via Skype or something like that?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Few people come here to Vienna to see us, but some do.
The lucky ones.
The lucky ones, yeah. It's the best to do it.
And are you doing live courses in English sometimes?
We might do questions and answer webinars very soon.
Yeah.
We might do live courses. For me personally, it's really a question of time.
Yes, and it depends on the how many people I'm sure are interested.
Yes, but we are open for many developments here, and we do work mainly on Skype with people because that's the only practical way in these days.
But I really recommend everyone to look at Werner's materials and check out his webinars and things, because the detail in them is so amazing, and the insights are so thorough, and the structure is always so elegant as well. Everything is really, really clearly thought through and engaging. So it's not just a mental field. You get that. You feel. You can feel your heart, coming through it, and you can feel the heart in it. And I think that's what. It's when I talked about sin thinking.
Yeah, I really like that, Richard. That's exactly what it's all about.
Yeah.
Heart and mind really in union.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Werner, so much for coming on, and I hope some people got to see your face, and I'm glad they heard your voice. And everyone can go and check out the free stuff we send links for, and I think it's on the if you get lost, it's on the bottom of the Gene Keys site as well as Werner's site, integralhumandesign.net. It's also, there's a little footer at the top of the Gene Keys site called, I think it says free HD stuff, and there's some other stuff in there as well, which I'll tell you about.
Free resources, I think you call it.
Yeah, or free HD resources it might be. may have changed its name by now. So yeah, great. Well, thank you, Werner.
Thank you.
It's really nice to have you on here for a short while at least.
Thank you for having me again. And thank you for this beautiful synthesis of the journey you have been through.
Well, and likewise you. So, and you may have noticed on there were, Werner said they're offering a forum for questions so that people you can take your questions there, and over the next few weeks or so, Werner and Laura can look at those questions and think about them and then answer them in their own time, because otherwise there's just I know how many questions there may be around these two subjects and bringing it together. That's why we're doing it in that way. Also, I've put quite a few some free resources on human design on that link at the bottom of my website. There from my personal archive. I'm going to go on adding stuff to that because I've just decided to release everything that I did in those days and to release it pretty much as free stuff. So you're going to find writings and articles and books and manuals, and obviously the books, if they're printed, will have to be paid for, but everything else, insights and things, I'm going to just make them available freely to people. So at the moment, I think there's just two things on there. There's the 7-year article I did, and there's the a book that I started to write on human design that Ra asked me to do. It was called an A to Z of You, Human Design System Introduction, an A to Z of You. And I wrote the first 4 chapters, A to D, and took it to HarperCollins or someone like that, Thorson's, and through a friend, and they looked at it and thought it was great, but it didn't quite take for them. So I never finished that book. I just wrote the first 4 chapters, but then revisiting them recently, I realized that they were written at a kind of pivotal time, and that a lot of the key ingredients of human design are in those 4 chapters. So I now call it an A to D of You, and it's available. It's quite interesting, so if you want to read it, it's available. It's 50 pages or something. It goes into the types in detail, and their life codes, and it goes into decision making and stuff. So it's quite key. And as I said, I'll go on adding more things to that as I'm sort of sifting through my old archives. So we're almost done. I wanted to just thank you for bearing with me. I want to just bring it all back to the quintessence now. That's a favorite subject of mine, the quintessence. I talked in the beginning about sin thinking, and we've heard a lot of information today. And I want to bring it all just back to the core. We've heard about all these gates, these numbers, these gene keys, these centers, these spheres, channels, pathways, systems. And it's all a game, really. It's all it is. It's a game. These are all ways for us to talk about the Maya, about life, about the mental construct of life that we live in. But the quintessence of all this integration is what I began with, this word, sin thinking. To think with the heart, to rise up on the wings of your love, of your spirit, and to pierce the veils of this mental, emotional, material world. And when you pierce through that veil, then you're in, or you're out, depends on how you look at it. You're in. You're in the magical land. You're in the kingdom of the now. And the now you're breathing, now, it's the same now that Jesus breathed. It's the same now that Buddha breathed. It connects us directly through time, through space. It's the same air. It's the same moment. So when the higher mind sees through the quintessence, it uses the ladder of these words, of these systems. When it pierces that veil, which is the goal of all this, then it sees truth. And the truth radiates through your body. And the truth plunges you more deeply into you, more deeply than you've ever plunged before. So all these words, they all arise from the silence, and they all fall back into the silence. And the silence is alive. It pulses, it radiates from your core, the silence. So when you sit silently and you bring your attention to the quintessence, the quintessential point in your navel, if you sit for long enough, patiently enough, you will feel the silence emanating from there, your center. So remember this always. The quintessence is beyond all the words and all the questions and all the insights. The quintessence is simplicity itself. It's beautiful. It's the light, the inner light. So I wish you all a wonderful holiday season. I won't talk to you until after the new year. And may the light shine brightly and clearly in your heart, in your eyes. Maybe it shine in the hearts of those around you, your loves, your families, your friends, even your enemies, if you have some. If you're lucky enough to have some. Enemies are wonderful like that. And yes, I want to say thank you to you all for being here and for listening. And yes, blessings to everyone.